Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cinema Mancuso, and this is Notes on the News. I'm Peter Mancuso, and this is the show where I break down the biggest stories in film, media, entertainment, and give you my thoughts. If you join us live, super happy to have you. If at any point you have any questions or comments about any of the topics I'm going to be covering, feel free to drop it in the live chat. I do my best to kind of keep an eye on it. It's always more enjoyable for me to do the show when other people are kind of contributing their own thoughts and ideas and asking questions. It really makes it feel like a conversation. If you haven't already, please like this live stream. It really helps with engagement and the algorithm and people, finding the channel. So if you have found the channel, why not subscribe? I'm trying to grow this community as best I can here. If you're watching this after the fact, still super happy to have you. By the time you're watching this, there should be time codes in the description so you can kind of, jump around at your leisure. We stream this show every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern time, and same deal as before. Don't forget to like this video and do not forget to subscribe. Okay, let's take a look at the box office from this past week. Total domestic box office was a little under 129 million, about a 34% drop, which, is not like the end of the world, right? Because you're going to see these fluctuations week to week, and as I mentioned last week, how there's just nothing big opening this week. If you see, literally, I talked about 4 films opening. One of them didn't even make it into the top 10. That's how small we're talking here, right? The biggest new movie was Clown in a Cornfield, a horror thriller. From my understanding, it's almost like a little tongue-in-cheek with it. Surprisingly, critics seem to like it more than audiences, but again, it might just be, it might be statistically insignificant, that tomato meter versus the popcorn meter. Notably, in terms of the box office, it brought in about 3.6 million, which, not only fell within my projections, but actually exceeded my target of 3 million, right? So, okay, pretty decent, right? But when you set the expectations really low, of course it's gonna, when you exceed them, it's impressive, but, you set the expectations really low. I guess, the big point of note here is considering it only cost about $1 million to make, right? So worldwide, it's made a little under 4 million. And in Hollywood, despite what Hollywood studios want you to think, they always love to have the huge openings, to have the big headlines. But really, it's a numbers game, and you want to see how much money can I get how many dollars can I get for every dollar I put into it, right? So assuming this $1 million budget figure is accurate, according to Wikipedia, that's the budget, so we're gonna have to go on faith here. This is already profitable, right? And that's the thing I always talk about in this channel, over and over and over. But it bears repeating because it's true, right? That, horror films have a very low ceiling. There's only so much money you can make with a horror film. But the floor is also pretty low in that, you can reasonably expect a certain box office return. And we're really seeing that on display here. The perfect corollary to this whole point about the ROI and how much money you gain for every dollar is another new movie opening this past week, Shadow Force, opening at number 7. At least Clown in the Cornfield made it into the top 5. So this was at number 7. Critics destroyed this. Audiences seem to like it, but again, audiences are kind of dumb, right? All things considered, I don't mean that in a condescending way, even though it kind of is condescending, but rather the group, has lives, right? Not everyone is into movies the way other people are, including myself, right? So, most people just want something that's semi-entertaining or interesting, right? This brought in about 2.15 million, right? We're getting really because it's so low, we gotta get really granular with the box office. Again, fell within my projections, exceeded my target of 2, right? The concern, though, here is if the budget number is correct, this cost $40 million. How? How does this movie cost $40 million? It seems like such direct-to-streaming slop. And it costs $40 million. Maybe it's going to the stars, right? Kerry Washington. She really needs to get a better agent or something. Because, what is she doing in a movie like this? So, assuming these numbers are accurate, right now it currently has a negative 95% return. Now, audiences, again, seem to really like it. But that being said, it doesn't seem like it's a movie that's going to have good word of mouth and people are going to keep coming week after week after week. So I think we can safely classify Shadow Force beyond a flop. It is a bomb. It is an atomic bomb of box office proportion. A movie that's doing a little bit better, but only because I don't have the budget number, so we can't really compare it against anything, is Fight or Flight, also opening number 8 here. Critics and audiences seem to kind of be on the same page about it, kind of liking it all right. Made just a little over $2 million, like literally just a couple $1,000s over $2 million, which puts it above my target of 2, projected around 1 to 3. And again, another film, I guess Josh Hartnett is in this, playing another crazy guy, following his performance in M. Night Shyamalan's, what was that called? Trap, right? So again, I think this really just encapsulates the state of the box office for this particular weekend. It really is like the calm before the storm that people say. Which I guess is not just like a saying, but like it actually speaks to something about like storms, that like it gets everything gets really still and quiet. And then, the hurricane comes through, right? And that hurricane in this analogy being the summer box office season, right? We got a little bit of that with Thunderbolts, but this is really, everyone's just kind of laying low. And if you notice, a lot of the movies held their placements from last week, including Thunderbolts, right? Like I mentioned, now in its second week, held its first place spot. Again, critics seem to like this. Audiences seem to really like it. It's being called one of the better MCU movies. I don't want to say one of the best, because even if it's relative, that he's using the word best feels too strong. Admittedly, I have not seen it, but it seems like people are like, oh, this one's actually not garbage. Okay, that's pretty good. 28% drop, so really strong holding. Right? And this brings its worldwide total to a little over $271 million off of a $180 million budget. So, we have crossed that initial threshold of the budget, but ideally you want to double that budget. So it's really going to be a question of, can it sustain itself over the next couple of weeks before the summer box office season really begins in earnest to get to that $360 million worldwide number. Because again, we'll talk about, there's nothing huge opening next week, but it's not tiny like this, where even the bigger new movie is only making like single digit millions, right? So again, it still remains to be seen how Thunderbolts is going to do. But again, if the word of mouth continues on this movie of it being not garbage, you could see it have some strong legs week to week to week, but it still remains to be seen, right? Sinners is still here, again, holding its number 2 spot. Again, audiences and critics love this. I actually finally schlepped out of my apartment to go see a movie. I've been really bad. For those of you who've been following, I've been taking a hiatus from doing my movie reviews. So because of that, I'm not going to the theater and seeing like every single thing anymore. But my fiance Viviana was like, let's go see Sinners. So we went to go see it. I thought it was great. Kind of messy, but really great. All things considered, like really a big swing. And I really appreciate it for that. And this is its 4th week. I was a little surprised to see that this is its 4th week now in theaters. And if you look at the legs on this is a movie that, if you remember, its 2nd week actually had a huge jump, just because of the word of mouth was so strong. And this is just so exciting. Again, an original film by a black director with a predominantly black cast. Original, doing so well off a $90 million budget, making a little under $300 million. So it is definitely within the profitable zone. So it really goes to show that people will go see something if it's good. But I think the winning formula is high concept, but really, really, really well made, right? Like people come for the conceit of vampires in Jim Crow South, but they stay for the character dynamics and the themes and the racial politics. So I think that's the winning formula. It'd be great if just a good movie can just do well because it's a good movie, but clearly that's not going to work, right? So it's like, if you're going to make broad appeal movies, you may as well just like make them good. And it's like such a dumb thing. Like, maybe what if we make our movies good? And I'm being kind of straw-manning it, but that's literally Bob Iger said something to that effect in so many words. It was like, we really sacrificed the quality, and we're going to try to improve that, and that's going to help our box office. It's like, no shit, make good movies, and people will go, right? So it seems so novel, but at the same time, so simple, right? So just, have your 4-quadrant concept, but execute it in a way that cinephiles and really hardcore moviegoers can appreciate. But what's a movie that hardcore cinephiles do not appreciate is a Minecraft movie. Still here in the top 10, holding its 3rd place spot from last week. Now in its 6th week. Again, critics did not really care for this. Audiences love it. Of course, it's become a meme. Brought in a little under 10.5 million for the week. But interestingly, the legs are not as strong as something like Sinners, because Minecraft movie opens big, but then has a pretty precipitous drop, right? It's obviously holding well. I mean, it's still here again, not only in the top 10, but the top 5 in its 6th week. But that opening, that biggest weekend is a bigger proportion of its box office, unlike Sinners, which is just like really holding well week to week. But this movie's at over 900 million. It's been profitable almost from the jump. Is this going to get to $1 billion? Maybe. Again, if it keeps holding, yes. Especially because of the international market, which is insane. That a Minecraft movie. Also, the presumptuousness of calling it a Minecraft, like one of many Minecraft movies. It's just it's not the Minecraft movie. Will there be a sequel? I don't know. Again, I haven't seen it. I don't know if it opens the door for a sequel, but I would imagine that they are trying to get everyone involved again to do some kind of follow-up. Because again, just the meme response of people just going and be somewhat obnoxiously, from my understanding, but engaging with the film, we'll maybe say charitably, that ultimately leads to big numbers, right? And then The Accountant 2 is still here at number 4. Again, critics liked it okay, audiences really like it. Again, it's that exact kind of high concept film, and I can't really speak to if it's executed very well from a cinematic point of view, but audiences like shit like this, right? Again, it's only in its 3rd week, so the legs are still kind of low, and it's made about 83 million worldwide off of an $80 million budget, so it's crossed that initial threshold. We want to see it try to, we'll see if it's able to hold. And it seems to be making decent money overseas, so maybe it could get to 160 million, but that's becoming more unlikely. It's really going to depend on these next couple of weeks if the drop is like this or if it's more steady as she goes. The Account, no, I already talked about The Account too. Until Dawn, just briefly want to touch on again, like I said last time, considering critics didn't really like this and audiences didn't really like it that much more, it's surprising that this is turned into a it is a profitable film off of $15 million. It's made almost $45 million worldwide, right? So again, the same thing I was saying before with The Clown in the Cornfield. Horror films have a baked in amount of money that you can expect to make, given certain factors. So I guess maybe, and if you look at the domestic versus worldwide, it seems like more than half of this money is coming from overseas. So I guess the Until Dawn brand is stronger there, or maybe overseas market, because I would imagine maybe a lot of American horror films don't have a lot of overseas play, but because this is based off of a Sony video game, they have a wider distribution internationally than they normally would for a horror film like this, and maybe international audiences aren't used to the sloppiness of this, how cliche it is, so maybe there's a novelty in that, and that's why it's doing so well overseas, right? And then just very, very briefly, both in their 5th weeks now, dropping from 7th and 8th place to 9th and 10th place respectively, we have The Amateur and The King of Kings. Notably, The King of Kings, I really want to touch on. The fact that this is still in theaters, or not even still in theaters, but in the top 10, I think is noteworthy here. Again, an animated retelling of the gospel in some way, right? Of the Bible. It's made about $66 million worldwide off of a roughly $25 million budget. That's, of course, converted from won, which is like the South Korean currency. So this is profitable, and this is well after Easter, right? So, again, it really speaks to our moment. And when we were getting the bits of the newest season of The Chosen, we were getting the bits chopped up in like the first 3 episodes released in theaters, and then the next week the bunch. You know, they were doing fairly well, all things considered. So, again, I think it speaks to something I've talked about on the channel before, that you're going to see a lot more religious content. And I don't have they're not big enough stories to really cover on the channel, but I mean, I've seen headlines of this new story about Noah's Ark has been commissioned, or this, that, the other. You're going to see a lot more projects within like the religious realm, but by religious, of course, we really mean Christian. You know, it'd be cool if we had Islamic films or Jewish films, but when we say religious, of course, we're really just talking about Christian media, right? And then looking ahead to this upcoming weekend, we have Final Destination Bloodlines, a kind of sort of soft reboot, refresh, if you will, of the Final Destination franchise, where people survive a tragic accident that they shouldn't have survived, and now death is coming for them in the most gruesome, sadistic, and hilarious ways possible. This is projected to make around 31 to 60, so kind of a wide range. I'm going to put my target right around 45, kind of like right in the middle. The reviews, like the review embargo just lifted today, and supposedly it's getting decent coverage by critics. We'll see what like those final Rotten Tomatoes scores kind of settle around, and we'll especially be interested to see how audiences like the movie. And then we also have a film, Hurry Up Tomorrow, which is a thriller starring The Weeknd, as well as it looks like Barry Keoghan there. Very, very small opening, again, kind of more in line with what we've been seeing from this past week. Only projected to make around 2 to 8 million. I'm going to put this around 5. I feel like The Weeknd, like this is a movie that they should have made 5-10 years ago. I feel like The Weeknd obviously is still really popular, but he's really only popular with like normies. Like people like his songs, but it's music that you'll hear in like an Abercrombie and Fitch, right? It's not like the most acclaimed work, at least from my vantage point. So, you know, it's not really going to open very big, but it's going to be interesting. Kind of again, these huge summer box office releases, how the all the chips are gonna fall, right? Okay, before going on, just want to give a quick plug to a YouTube channel I recently started a couple months ago called Replay Rewind. 1,000 video games across 50 years of gaming history. Can I play them all before I die? Well, we're gonna find out. It's my attempt to play through all of these games, many of which I've never played before, and kind of use them to trace the story of gaming history. It's been a lot of fun to do so far. It would really mean the world to me if you could just go check it out. You don't even have to subscribe, but just go check it out. See if it's your thing. You can find the link to that in the description down below. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay. Let's talk about story number 1. So Disney has announced a new theme park and resort, this is really exciting, to be built in all places in Abu Dhabi, right? The capital of the United Arab Emirates, or the UAE, a very tiny, small little country that borders a couple other countries, but primarily Saudi Arabia, right? Disney's going to be partnering with a company, Mural, right? M-I-R-A-L. They are an immersive destination and experience creator, right? Which is what how the trades kind of classified them. The theme park's going to be developed, built, and operated by Mural. So it's kind of like some of Disney's other international parks, where it's like another company that does it, and Disney's like licensing its IP and providing its expertise when it comes to the actual creative side of things, but really they're going to be the ones doing the most of the work here. And I got a quote here from the Mural chairman, Mohammed Khalifa Al Mubarak, saying, quote, "Abu Dhabi is a place where heritage meets innovation, where we preserve our past while designing the future. The collaboration between Abu Dhabi and Disney demonstrates the remarkable results of combining visionary leadership and creative excellence. What we are creating with Disney in Abu Dhabi is a whole new world of imagination, an experience that will inspire generations across the region and the world, creating magical moments and memories that families will treasure forever. Through the development of unique attractions and experiences, Abu Dhabi continues to be a destination of choice for the world, end quote. And like I said, Disney will provide creative design and operational oversight with licensing IP and earning royalties as a result. So notably, Disney is not putting up a cent to build this, right? They are their role here is the creative side of things, but it's really going to be Mural doing, again, most of that work. And I got a quote here from Disney Experiences chairman Josh D'Amaro, who, of course, you might know him as one of the potential CEO successors to Bob Iger. He said during this announcement, saying, quote, "This groundbreaking resort destination represents a new frontier in theme park development. Our resort in Abu Dhabi will be the most advanced and interactive destination in our portfolio. The location of our park is incredibly unique, anchored by a beautiful waterfront, which will allow us to tell our stories in completely new ways. This project will reach guests in a whole new part of the world, welcoming more families to experience Disney than ever before. Ultimately, it will be a celebration of what's possible when creativity and progress come together," end quote. And like I said, this is going to be a waterfront resort located on Yas Island. And yes, it's called Yas Island, Y-A-S. Maybe I'm mispronouncing it, but that's kind of hilarious, right? So let's take a little step back here. So, this is the next installment or chapter of this story that is like Disney theme parks, right? Of course, this started in 1955 with Anaheim's Disneyland in California. This is back when Walt Disney was still alive, of course, about a decade or so before he passed away. This was his attempt, if you hear like the story, right? He was with his daughters in like the 40s or whatever, whenever they were young. At like a carnival or, like a carousel, and the girls were on the carousel and he was just sitting on a crappy bench watching them, and it was kind of dirty and run down, and he had this idea of improving the amusement park experience, so that, it was cleaner, it was higher quality, and families and the whole family could have fun together, as opposed to like, here's the fun stuff for mom and dad, here's the fun stuff for the kids, right? So now with Abu Dhabi, this now brings the Disney theme park division to 7 primary resort locations. And of course, each resort has multiple sub theme parks, right? So starting with, again, Disneyland Resort in 1955, and then Walt Disney World Resort in Florida in 1971. And of course, those sub parks we're talking, they have Magic Kingdom, Epcot, Hollywood Studios, Animal Kingdom, things like that. Then in 1983, we got Tokyo Disney Resort. Then in 1992, we got Disneyland Paris. So I think back then it was called Euro Disney, right? Euro Disneyland or something. 2005, we got Hong Kong Disneyland Resort. 2016, the most recent was Shanghai Disney. And now we have Disneyland Abu Dhabi, which unclear if that's going to be the official name. We it was kind of vague, but until we get confirmation, we can just call it Disneyland Abu Dhabi. And there is no timeline set for this. Like, they didn't say this is coming in this year, but most likely, I think the target's around 2030. And I got a quote here from the CEO of Disney, Bob Iger, saying, quote, "We're not pinning down a date yet. It typically takes us between 18 months and 2 years to design and fully develop, in approximately 5 years to build, but we're not making any commitments right now," end quote. So, I think 2030 is the hope, but they're not, they're leaving their options open, right? But the theme park part of the Walt Disney Company, this larger corporation that has far exceeded the imagination of anything Walt Disney could have ever dreamed of in terms of its scope and scale. The theme parks division has become like a major cash cow for the company. I think I read a stat that says that the theme parks and the experiences, so I think that would also include cruises and I think they have some non-theme park resorts, like I think they have like a Moana one in Maui or Hawaii or somewhere, right? The theme parks division makes up about 60% of the company's revenue. That's huge, right? And that's why it was such a big deal when COVID happened, because they just shut everything down, right? So this is a really important vertical for Disney, despite the fact that really a lot of people imagine it, and in some ways philosophically, it is the animation division, that core animation division, that is like the heart or the anchor of the company. financially, it's the theme parks, right? An eighth location is possible, in addition to Abu Dhabi at some point, but it's unlikely in the near term, right? And another quote here from Bob Iger saying, quote, "Well, I'm not going to rule out the possibility of another location. There's nothing that's really being planned near term to actually build another park in what would be an eighth location. It's not exactly something that's a priority right now for us," end quote. Which makes complete sense, because you got to focus on this one. This is going to be a lot of work, right? So, a little bit of context about the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. So, this was a former, let's do a little bit of world history and geopolitics, right? So, this was a former British protectorate, right? So, it was controlled by the United Kingdom, I think up until like the 1960s. Obviously for its strategic position, for its oil fields, things like that. And then in the early 1970s, 7 emirates, right, which are essentially, areas ruled by an emir, which I had to look up, essentially a commander or a prince or something like that. 7 emirates united to form this single country in the early 1970s. The principal emirate would be Abu Dhabi. It's the capital of the UAE. It's the largest emirate. And it's no stranger to Western influence, or maybe better put, investment, right? It's attracted Western companies and institutions. It's been trying to diversify its economy away from just being about oil. Because if your economy is just built around if it's predominantly built around one thing, if that becomes disrupted, it could really tank your economy. So, Forbes notes that that Yas Island is already a hub for other Western theme parks like Ferrari World, SeaWorld, and Warner Brothers World, right? So again, this is a really interesting choice of location. It makes sense economically. The publication, The Wrap, notes that the UAE is within a 4-hour flight of a third of the world's population. That's crazy. That specific positioning on the map presents a huge opportunity for, again, what is that? A third of the world's population. So what's a third of 7? So we're looking at somewhere like, 1 billion, 2 billion people. The UAE, I believe Abu Dhabi specifically, is home to the largest global airline hub in the world, right? So it is built. It not only is close to a third of the world's population, it has the infrastructure and capacity to bring that 1/3 of the world's population into the country rather seamlessly, all things considered. And I got another quote here from Bob Iger, a lot of quotes from Bobby today, saying, quote, "It was very obvious to us that there were many people, basically hundreds of millions in the world, that are income qualified, where a trip to one of our 6 locations was pretty lengthy in nature and expensive. And so we thought the best way, obviously, to reach those people is to basically bring our product to them," end quote. So really touching on this idea of there's a lot of money in this region of the world, but our parks are just too far to make it worth it for a lot of these people. So all this makes sense economically. The concern here, though, is that the political situation is tricky. Ignore the fact that the Middle East is just tumultuous in general, and has always been, or at least since the West really got involved about 100 plus years ago. But especially now, with everything going on with, Israel's assault on the Palestinians and the Gazans and those in the West Bank. So that's already an issue. That's just like in the background. The UAE specifically has gotten into issues. I think the U.S. State Department, has said that they outlaw same-sex relationships, which really, little light bulb in my head, because think about how far we've come from just a couple years ago when Disney got in hot water for not taking a stance on Florida's Don't Say Gay bill. But I guess now, like we've talked about on this channel before, now that the world, I guess, has decided, marginalized communities don't matter anymore, they go, okay, well, whatever. Like, the Don't Say Gay bill may as well be like Pride Month extravaganza compared to the UAE, right? And the Washington Post cites an Instagram user, which is really annoying that if I was an Instagram user and the Washington Post cited my post, I would hope that they would cite who I am, like my username, but they just said a Instagram user. But this is really, I think, revealing quote saying, quote, Disney, I love you, but this is an incredibly poor choice of location for a new park and cuts off so many people. I can guarantee myself and other people like me won't be going for fear of what could potentially happen for just being myself, end quote. So clearly, you know, even though I don't know who this is, clearly a Western person of the queer community, right? And this is really heartbreaking and troublesome. Though if I were Disney, my response would probably be, we don't care because you're not the person we're trying to get to come to this park. It's all the people in this region. I don't think that's a morally acceptable excuse, but that's the excuse that they're probably thinking, right? Again, Disney, like I said, part of all this, they probably don't really care about things like this anymore. But on top of the same-sex stuff, you know, the UAE has cracked down on freedom of expression. It's gotten into issues for quote-unquote slave labor, which I'm doing some more research isn't entirely accurate, but I could just speak from my own experience. I went to NYU, right? And I don't know if they opened it while I was a student, but it wasn't that long before, if that was the case. I think it was like a couple of years before. NYU opened an international campus in Abu Dhabi called NYU Abu Dhabi. And I know there was a lot of controversy around it for, you know, allegations of misconduct with dealing with the company actually building the campus for NYU. You know, involved a lot of immigrant laborers from surrounding regions who were underpaid, exploited, put in dangerous working conditions, had immigration status threatened. It was just a very not good situation. So you would think Disney would want to avoid that. But again, I think they're thinking and hoping that, unlike NYU, whose customer base are, you know, forget like the political divide of like left or right, like liberal or conservative. They're just people who are more engaged and know what NYU is and what it is doing and what's going on in the world. I think Disney's doing the calculus of most of our consumers or customers, they're not going to even know about this, let alone care, right? They're just going to be like, oh, that's cool. They just assume, oh, well, if Disney's doing it, it must be being done above board. It must be being done ethically. But corporations, I think you give them too much credit. But also B, again, they're not handling the construction in terms of like the actual operational part of that. So though I guess there is some hope. NPR notes that this company Mural claims to be quote unquote progressive with a social responsibility strategy. But again, those could all just be corporate buzzwords, right? Another little sidebar tangent here is, what does this mean for the CEO succession plan or saga at Disney, right? Of course, Bob Iger left Disney in 2020, but his hand-picked successor did not really work out, so Bob Iger returned to CEO. So now, I've talked about this in the channel, that the company's really focused on this succession plan. And Josh D'Amaro, who, again, is the chairman of the Disney Experiences division of Disney, was discussed as a potential successor to Bob Iger. But is he going to be too busy with this? Because presumably, I believe they said Bob Iger's leaving at this point, like the next year or two. This is like a long-term project. So you would imagine, if Disney was, now I could be reading into this because they might decide, oh, it's not actually going to be a problem. You would think you would want your head of this division to remain constant throughout this process. So I don't know. Is this kind of like people say failing upwards? Is this like succeeding downwards? Like, you're doing such a good job, Josh, that we need to keep you where you are? I don't know. But that's kind of a tangent here. But all of this to say, a new Disney park is always exciting. And I say that as if like I've been covering this for 50 years or 70 years, right? I was just in college, like my freshman or sophomore year, when the last Disney resort opened in Shanghai, right? But it's always really exciting because change and new means there's opportunity for change and new, right? And that's a really dumb way of phrasing it, but that it's these moments of inflection that new exciting things can happen, right? If nothing else, more revenue can mean that the company can take more creative risks, not only in its theme parks, but across the company, having this other revenue source. And also, since, and this isn't to devalue and be like Western centric, so forgive me if that's how it comes off, but Disney probably imagines in their mind the primary Disney parks are Disneyland and Walt Disney World in Florida. So these other parks often have the capacity or capability it gives the company freedom to try different things. And I got a quote here from Disney saying, quote, "We haven't decided everything that will go into it, but we do know it will be anchored by a castle." I think this was Josh DeMar or Bob Iger, actually. "And again, the modernization that is Abu Dhabi, the castle will be the first real modern castle that we built. You start thinking about what is possible, actually envisioning a castle rising up, in this case from the sand, and also being on the water," end quote. So, it's a new canvas to paint on, right? And I think it's going to be really exciting, with bated breath, because again, this seems ripe for worker exploitation based off of what we have seen in this region before. But nevertheless, it's always cool and exciting to see a new Disney park conceptualized, announced, and actually come to fruition. Okay, before going on, I just want to give another quick plug to the podcast I do with my fiance Viviana called Now That's What I Call a Franchise, where we pick a film franchise and we go through every single installment, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We recently just started up our season on the Muppets, which has already been a lot of fun. Definitely go recommend you check that out. You can find us wherever you get your podcast. You can also just find us on YouTube if that's your preferred way to podcast. You can also just find us in the link down in the description below. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. I should get one of those like hats that people get at like sporting events that you put like the soda or the beer in the thing. It has like a little straw. I should just get that for wash, right? Like I'd be like a little dribble. Like, anyway. Okay, let's talk about story number 2. So Marvel Studios is in early talks with the director of Thunderbolts, Jake Schreier. Apologies if I mispronounce. They're in talks with him to direct the MCU's X-Men movie. Right? This is an exclusive from Deadline, which suggests that he is the studio's top choice. Apparently, there's been months of meetings, but things really kicked into high gear after the early positive buzz from critics for Thunderbolts, which of course came out, I think it was 2 weeks. A little over 2 weeks ago. And this film, unnamed, hasn't been like officially, like, we really know nothing about it, but we do know that the screenplay is going to be by Michael Leslie, who wrote The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, the prequel that came out, I think, a couple of years ago, right? So, this is really interesting to see the moves being made to, this isn't just like, oh yeah, we're developing, we're working on it. We're really seeing the X-Men's entrance into the MCU. Of course, this is the iconic comic franchise of the Marvel Comics brand. Debuted back in 1963. It was one of those like original offerings from Marvel, back when like Stan Lee really took over, and that's when you get like Fantastic Four and the Incredible Hulk and Spider-Man and all of like these iconic characters. Famously, my generation was introduced to X-Men, I feel like, in a lot of ways through the film series at 20th Century Fox, which, was a mixed bag in terms of the quality. Some of them are like some of the best movies ever made, and some of them are the worst movies ever made. But nevertheless, that franchise, along with Blade and probably even more so Spider-Man, the Fox X-Men movies really helped start the modern superhero movie trend. So it is one of the more popular comic set of characters with the general audiences, if for no other reason because the films were really popular, right? In the same way that Iron Man is now a very popular character with general audiences because of the movies, whereas before the Iron Man movie came out, he was kind of like a second level character, at least in terms of recognition and popularity, right? But again, though, this was over at Fox, and Disney is now doing, and Marvel Studios are doing their shared universe. How's this going to gel? Eventually, Disney buys Fox in 2017. So, by, the transitive property, they now secure the rights to things like X-Men and Fantastic Four and Daredevil and those kind of properties. And they've been slowly introducing elements into the MCU from like the X-Men ethos, but most of it has disappointingly just been primarily cameos from the Fox franchise, whether it be a post-credit scene or Deadpool and Wolverine in some, right? So it's going to be exciting to see where they take. We know the X-Men cameos are going to be in Avengers Doomsday or Secret War. Probably both of those. But again, those are like returning actors, whereas presumably this movie is going to be like, hopefully, fingers crossed, is going to be a new take on it, new cast, new actors, new continuity, things like that. So looking at this director, Jake Schreier, I really know very little about him, but from what I've been able to glean, he's primarily a TV and music video director. And he's only directed 3 feature films. He directed Robot and Frank in 2012, which I from my understanding was pretty decently reviewed at the time. Then he also directed Paper Towns, the adaptation of the John Green novel in 2015, which is mid. Right? I remember seeing it in theaters the summer before going to college. And then most recently Thunderbolts, right, in 2025. And obviously it's because of Thunderbolts that he's even in this conversation, right? The film has an 88% on Rotten Tomatoes currently, and the critical consensus reads, quote, assembling a ragtag band of underdogs with Florence Pugh as their magnetic standout, Thunderbolts refreshingly returns to the tried and true blueprint of the MCU's best adventures, end quote. And like I've talked about this on this channel before, I admittedly have not seen Thunderbolts yet. I'm hoping to see it, once it comes out on digital or whatever. Like my goal is I'm definitely seeing Fantastic Four in theaters, so I'll probably do like a big MCU binge of everything I haven't caught up with yet, but right before then. But from my understanding, this movie is pretty good, right? It's nothing revolutionary, but it's like a solid, fun MCU movie, really kind of hearkening back to the old days, right? And it's not just that people like it, both critics and audiences, but it's doing fairly well financially, all things considered, so far. It had a $74 million domestic opening, and so far it has about $271 million worldwide to its name to date, right? So again, this kind of makes sense that they were kind of discussing this potential director pairing for a couple months now, but once it seemed like Thunderbolts was going to be a big hit, they really amped up the process. And the stakes are really high, right? And I talked about this on the channel many times, but it bears repeating. Marvel, particularly not just Marvel, like the company overall, but the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Marvel Studios, this film endeavor, it needs X-Men to survive. And not just that it needs it to exist, but it needs to be good, right? I mean, not to beat a dead horse, but let me do it right now. The post-Endgame MCU offerings has really been a mixed bag. And even the better stuff is still nothing like super, nothing to really write home about. And I think audiences have really become bored with the Marvel formula, especially since all of the films were really just spin-off. Like it was mostly with characters we already knew, with new characters in. We weren't really seeing anything new, right? In the way that Black Panther was new, even though Black Panther had already been introduced in Civil War. Like Black Panther was new. Guardians of the Galaxy was new. The novelty of the Avengers movies was new, but it no longer is, right? They thought maybe multiverse was their next new, and obviously that's worked out in the box office, but I think it's already getting stale, and we still have yet to see like their big 2-part Avengers multiversal shenanigans. So fresh properties like the Fantastic Four and X-Men are positioned to breathe a new life into the franchise. The former, right, Fantastic Four, which is coming out, it's crazy, it's coming out in 2 months. It is going to be a major litmus test for the future of the MCU. In ways that Captain America, that Deadpool and Wolverine couldn't be because of its nature, nor could Captain America, Brave New World, or Thunderbolts be either, because they're still kind of in that mold. Whereas Fantastic Four and then presumably an X-Men movie are going to be very different, if for no other reason, because we're just getting completely different characters and different kinds of characters. And in a lot of ways, X-Men's even more important, right? Because unlike Fantastic Four, X-Men, like I've mentioned before, was a beloved film franchise. Whereas Fantastic Four has struggled on the big screen. None of its films, even the ones that have been more successful than others, were not cultural phenomenons the way that the X-Men series has been, right? So I guess, is this a good choice? Tapping Jake Schreier to do this. It's the classic Marvel Studios business formula. Take a inexperienced director that you can control, essentially. So it's definitely keeping in line with what they've done in the past. But again, critics and audiences seem to like Thunderbolts. And of course, that movie is also an ensemble story, which I would imagine would be very relevant for making an X-Men movie. On top of all this, Deadline notes that Schreier, it's well known to Marvel that Schreier has a love for the X-Men specifically. So that probably was the origin of the matchup, but now that Thunderbolts is doing well, I think they're willing to give Jake a shot at this. But the stakes are very, very high. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay. Let's talk about story number 3. So the ongoing feud between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni, I like to say Baldoni, but I've been corrected in the comments, so I'll say Justin Baldoni from now on. Their feud, which has been going on for almost half a year now, continues. This started on the set of It Ends With Us, right? The adaptation of the successful novel about domestic abuse, and emotional, domestic violence and emotional abuse. She accused him of sexual harassment, though not the way that sounds. He wasn't like a Harvey Weinstein, but rather just saying or doing things that were inappropriate, according to her accusations. And then when bringing it up to Sony, who was the distributor, she's also accusing him of, after that, employing retaliation by conducting a covert smear campaign in the press to discredit her, right? Baldoni then sued Lively, as well as the New York Times, which published her story. He sued them for defamation. Then Lively made her, actually sued Baldoni, where before they were just accusations. Then she followed up with a counter lawsuit. And ever since then, they've been taking shots at one another in the press with different, bombshell revelations that will totally prove our side. And in effect, the evidence is really just like a Rorschach test that basically just confirms how you already feel, right? But though it's been kind of quiet lately. Like, there was a period where I did a story about this feud every week, or almost every week, for like a month or 2 months, it felt like. But we've had some new developments. So I'll start with the least interesting one, and we'll work our way upwards, so you have something to look forward to. So it's been confirmed that Lively will testify in court against Baldoni. Her attorney, Mike Gottlieb, said, quote, "The ultimate moment for a plaintiff's story is to be told is at trial. We expect that to be the case here with Lively. So we would, of course, expect her to be a witness at her trial. Of course, she's going to testify," end quote. And he also suggests that others will be present to speak, saying, quote, "There are individuals that were witnesses to or experienced misconduct that is relevant to Miss Lively's claims. We expect their testimony, particularly about what took place on set, will come out through live witness testimony," end quote. In response to this, Baldoni's attorney, Brian Friedman, kind of provide a flippant response, like maybe disrespectful, maybe too strong of a word, suggesting that they should hold her deposition at Madison Square Garden, saying, quote, "Hold the deposition at MSG, sell tickets or stream it, and donate every dollar to organizations helping victims of domestic abuse," end quote. So again, kind of making light of the situation, which isn't a great look, but kind of, if nothing else, it speaks to the truth of how the media, this is like red meat for the media, right? And that's why I've been talking about it every week, because the trades keep talking about it, and they keep talking about it because it's salacious, it's tabloid, it's like junk food with the calories of salad, right? It's it's tabloid-esque content, but it has the substance of a real story. So it's like having your cake and eat it too. But then the bigger new development here is that Baldoni's team has subpoenaed Taylor Swift. Pop sensation Taylor Swift. Of course, very good friend of Blake Lively. And there's rumors that they may also subpoena Hugh Jackman, who of course is good friends with Ryan Reynolds, who of course is married to Blake Lively, right? A representative for Taylor Swift said, quote, Taylor Swift never set foot on the set of this movie. She was not involved in any casting or creative decisions. She did not score the film. She never saw an edit or made any notes on the film. She did not even see It Ends With Us until weeks after its public release. Given that her involvement was licensing a song for the film, which 19 other artists also did, this document subpoena is designed to use Taylor Swift's name to draw public interest by creating a tabloid clickbait instead of focusing on the facts of the case, end quote. So, kind of making this argument that it's really just to have a big splash, have like another win in the press. Again, this is as much a publicity war as it is a legal one, right? And Lively's attorney Gottlieb said, quote, why are these people being subpoenaed? Do they have any actual relevance to the case at hand? You can't just go around subpoenaing people because they're famous and you think it will generate a bunch of headlines. And the federal courts don't tolerate that kind of behavior, end quote. In response, Baldoni's attorney, Brian Friedman, like I said, said, quote, although obviously uncomfortable for the Lively parties, the truth is not a distraction. The truth has been clearly shown through unedited receipts, documents, and real-life footage. Blake was the one who brought her high-profile friends into the situation without concern for their own personal or public backlash. As the truth shows, she used her dragons, capital D, to manipulate Justin at every turn, end quote. So this is going back to something I've talked about on the channel before, this idea that, you know, the real source of the tension was not sexual harassment, even if that is true, but more so creative differences and Lively wanting to have more say in the creative process, whereas Baldoni was like the writer, director, and producer, right? Which it's not bad for her to want that. It's just clearly a miscommunication and a poor setting of expectations on both sides, right? But this idea that Lively, when they would be having a creative dispute, would kind of name drop Taylor Swift or her husband Ryan Reynolds to kind of send a signal like, I have very powerful friends, you should accommodate what I'm saying or asking for, right? So again, this is really spreading far beyond the initial genesis of this beef. Again, now including friends of both Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds. Of course, they're also subpoenaing Marvel about the creation of the Nice Pool character in Deadpool Wolverine, which was reportedly based on Justin Baldoni, kind of like a faux feminist who it's all for show, right? But all of these developments, especially Brian Friedman, they're subpoenaing Taylor Swift, the suggestion of holding the deposition at Madison Square Garden. Lively's team has really denounced Baldoni's side of this case, saying, quote, Mr. Baldoni, Mr. Sarowitz, and team continued to turn a case of sexual harassment and retaliation into entertainment for the tabloids, going as far as suggesting that they sell tickets to a concert venue, Madison Square Garden, to witness Miss Lively's deposition, to subpoenaing Taylor Swift, a woman who has given a voice to millions all over the world. This is a very serious legal matter. This is a very serious legal matter, not Barnum and Bailey circus. The defendants continue to publicly intimidate, bully, shame, and attack women's rights and reputations, including in the past month seeking to strike down for all a powerful California victims' rights law, calling it, quote-unquote, unconstitutional. The disturbing actions by a billionaire, men who made their careers as female allies, and their team continue to show their true colors, end quote. So, again, pretty damning. And again, they've really spent a lot of their energy prematurely, because it seems, from my understanding, this trial's not happening until next March. So, I don't know. I guess we'll still be hearing about stuff because they're going to have depositions and stuff before the trial and whatnot, and new revelations will come out, I'm sure. And I guess the question is, everyone agrees this is bad for both parties, this whole feud. So I guess it'll be a question of, is this a game of chicken, and someone will blink before, so this doesn't actually go to trial. Because again, the court of public opinion is not the same as the courts, right? There's a higher standard, and you are under oath, right? So, one side or the other, maybe both sides don't want to have, maybe they don't want to have that magnifying glass on them in general, particularly as it relates to the situation. So only time will tell what's going to happen here. But I wanted to make sure you guys knew that there are still some updates happening in the Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni, It Ends With Us feud saga. Okay, before going on, I just want to give another quick plug to the YouTube channel I have called Peter Squared, where I cover topics related to film, media, entertainment, in a more structured video essay format. The video I have up right now is called A Closer Look at Frozen, where, you guessed it, I take a closer look at the Disney film Frozen, taking a look at what went right, what went wrong, and everything in between using these 2 cartoon versions of myself. It was a lot of fun to make. Hopefully it's a lot of fun to watch. Go comment and let me know why you disagree with everything I said. You can find the link to that in the description down below. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Ooh, I got some water in my glasses. Okay. So let's talk about story number 4. So this is a little local news here, sometimes on news channels, they'll be like the local site or the local spotlight or something, right? So the Bravo TV network has announced the next, I don't know what you call it, installment or branch of the Real Housewives franchise, and it's going to be the Real Housewives of Rhode Island, which is super exciting. So if you don't know, I'm from Rhode Island, and in fact, I'm actually going to be moving back to Rhode Island. I'm currently living in New York, but I'm going to be moving back to Rhode Island by the end of this summer. So I'm always excited about anything media, entertainment, film related happening in Rhode Island. Apparently this had been rumored back in December, but I didn't hear about it. And the official announcement says, quote, "Set against the shores of the Ocean State, the Real Housewives franchise expands into the world of a tight-knit circle of Rhode Islanders who have deep community roots and families that go back generations. With aspirational lives, thriving businesses, and tangled family dynamics, these decade-long friendships prove that in a state this small, there's no escaping your past or each other." It was like ... or each other, end quote. I got a quote here from Steven Feinberg, who's the executive director of the Rhode Island Film and TV office. Fun fact, I actually interned there one summer and met Steve. So again, there's a little bit of, a local personal connection here. Steve said, quote, "One of the most popular reality shows ever to grace television, the Real Housewives franchise, sparked an avalanche of enthusiasm when word spread that this entertainment series just might land in the Ocean State," end quote. And another quote from Governor Dan McKee, governor of Rhode Island, saying, quote, "We're excited to welcome the Real Housewives and their millions of viewers to Rhode Island. Our state is home to vibrant communities, amazing food, rich history, and stunning coastal beauty. Perfect for the spotlight. This is a great opportunity to support our local economy and bring national attention to all Rhode Island, and bring national attention to all that Rhode Island has to offer," end quote. Interestingly, though, this TV show will not be eligible for the state's 30% tax credit, right? Because that's reserved for films and traditional television shows, not reality programming, right? We have no announcement on the cast. There is some rumors that I saw online. I didn't know anybody reading the name, but as I'll talk about, Rhode Island's so small that, there's a good chance once they announce the names, if I go look it up, there might only be a 2 or 3 degree separation between me and them. But we have no announcement of the cast. But Andy Cohen, who of course, I guess is the whole, so full disclosure, I've never actually watched an episode of Real Housewives, but my understanding is it's primarily just a reality show, but then they'll do a reunion, which is hosted by Andy Cohen, right? He confirmed that the cast will be, quote unquote, very Italian, which makes sense considering Rhode Island. So, but looking at Real Housewives, again, this just speaks to how big this franchise has gotten, that it's now doing a show in Rhode Island, of all places. It's a major reality series franchise on Bravo, which is owned by NBC Universal. Notably, Bravo is one of the only cable channels that parent company is holding on to, while it's spinning off all the other ones, like, MSNBC and other cable channels under the umbrella. It's holding on to Bravo. In no small part, probably, because of Real Housewives. And if you've never watched the show, you really don't know much about it. Here's how Wikipedia briefly describes it, saying, quote, each installment of the franchise documents the personal and professional lives of a group of affluent women residing in a certain city or geopolitical region, end quote. Interesting that Wikipedia used the word geopolitical region to describe Real Housewives. You would think maybe they would choose like metro area or something. I don't know. Though this also speaks to, it's going to be very Italian, but it's going to be very white, right? Statistically speaking, if it's going to be about the lives of a group of affluent women, they're most likely going to be upper-class white women, right? But again, the show has been wildly successful and prolific. So this now makes 11 different installments of it, which include Orange County, New York City, Atlanta, New Jersey, D.C., Beverly Hills, Miami, Potomac, Dallas, Salt Lake City, and now Rhode Island. In addition to these now 11 main installments, there's also, I did not know this until doing this research, there are 27 spin-off series. I don't think they're all still running, but that is like the current total, as well as 21 international adaptations in other countries. So again, this really is like a phenomenon, or at the very least a wildly successful business proposition. And it couldn't happen to a better state, right? So again, this is in Rhode Island. This is where I'm from. Most of you probably only know about Rhode Island being the smallest state in the country. It's only about a little over 1,000 square miles. I think it's like 48 miles long, 40 miles across. It's really small. And the population, while it's not the smallest population, because some of the more rural states actually have a smaller population, it only has about a little over 1 million people. And the effect of that is that, and I mentioned before, like everybody knows everybody. Not literally, like I don't know every single person of that 1 million, but that there's probably a connection. And I could give you an example. When I went to NYU, when I came to New York, whenever I met anyone at school who was from Rhode Island, or really anyone in the city, I met them in Rhode Island. If I looked them up on Facebook, guaranteed we would have at least one mutual friend, if not multiple, right? From Rhode Island, right? So it just really speaks to the insularness of the community. I always say it's like a big small town, right? It's a, maybe too small to be a state, too big to be a city or municipality, and so it's like in this weird in between. Demographically, like I mentioned before, in terms of this is probably going to be focused on white women, right? The state is 70% white, primarily coming from Italian, Irish, Portuguese, English, and interestingly French Canadian descent up in Woonsocket, one of our cities up in the very, very top bordering Massachusetts. It's the most Catholic state in the U.S. by percentage, and of course it's host to these beautiful landscapes and environments between the ocean, really well-maintained forest and parks, as well as cities like Providence, which Providence specifically is considered by many to be the arts capital of New England. Interestingly, not Boston, right? Which of course is the bigger city in New England and more famous, right? So this is really exciting to see this, but of course not everyone is excited. And the Providence Journal, this is also really exciting. If you're watching this as its own segment, you go to the sources. They're all Rhode Island publications, so get a little, endorsement or promotion for local papers, right? The Providence Journal notes that not everyone is excited about this, right? There's a concern that the show will make Rhode Islanders look bad, right? Because, the people on The Real Housewives are typically, I'll say charitably, not necessarily role models always in terms of the way they interact with other human beings, right? And the pettiness and the squabbling. But I'm not sure if this should really be a concern. It's going to make Rhode Island look bad. Since they've done 10 other installments of this in 10 other cities, and all those cities are still thriving. They have not been destroyed because they have a Real Housewives program. I got a quote here from Kristen Adamo, who's the president and CEO of the Providence Warwick Convention and Visitors Bureau, saying, quote, I am cautiously optimistic about the Real Housewives of Rhode Island. I'm hoping they show the beauty of the state and the accomplishments of these women. But I have seen episodes of the other shows, and it doesn't always go that way. I think once we see a few episodes, we will know the tone and decide if it will be useful in tourism marketing, end quote. Another quote here from Mel Rainsberger of Providence, who I looked up. I think she's a designer in Providence, saying, quote, "It's always great when Rhode Island can show off to the whole nation. We have superb food, activities, and many amazing destinations. But I'm a little afraid it'll only feature the already oversaturated Newport area and not give attention to our other amazing towns," end quote. And I think that's a really good point, that there's so much more to the state than the beach and Newport, right? But that's often what gets attention regionally or nationally. Rainsberger also goes on to say, quote, "From what knowledgeable industry folks are telling me, the production doesn't use union labor, and most of the crew will be brought from out of state. We have talented homegrown creatives that would love to work on a big production like this, and it's disappointing they won't be included," end quote. In response to this, I think the Providence Journal reached out to NBC Universal for comment about this, and Jennifer Geiser, who's a spokesperson for NBC Universal, said, quote, "There will definitely be a mix of local and out-of-state production people. Also, you can definitely expect the production to bring business to local merchants, including hotels, car services, restaurants, bars, and retail," end quote. So, again, that also kind of brings me to my next point, is that there is like this, to Mel Rainsberger's point, that there is a community in Rhode Island that can really pick up the slack here. And the state needs more film production, or just production in general, right? It's something that is big. It's very sporadic, but it's growing, you know. And I've talked about this on this channel before, that, you know, we need to, you know how we have like wealth inequality? We have like film or entertainment opportunity inequality, where it's like, you know, LA, New York, and then now more recently Atlanta really take the lion's share of all production. So in Rhode Island, like, it's a big deal when we get like one new big movie shooting in Rhode Island. Like, I think the one that's upcoming is an M. Night Shyamalan film starring Jake Gyllenhaal. So that's really exciting. But think about how many films shoot in LA or New York or Atlanta a year, right? One film isn't enough. Now, here's the thing, though, is I'm not suggesting or even hoping that Rhode Island can become an LA, New York, or Atlanta level film industry, but we want to at least kind of close the gap, right? You're seeing so many productions leave those states, particularly California, especially now with Trump's suggested 100% tariffs on films made outside the United States. You know, stay in the United States. Rhode Island, again, has a 30% tax credit, right? And I could just speak for me personally. You know, I wanted to be a filmmaker and pursue this as a potential career. And I was very fortunate and lucky to go to NYU. And that's why I moved to New York. It wasn't because, I got to get out of here, I want to get to New York. It's because that was where NYU was, right? If I wanted to actually have a real chance or shot in the industry, staying in Rhode Island was a non-starter. So I yearn for a future where aspiring filmmakers like myself shouldn't have to choose, right, between their home that they know and they love and their family and their friends. They have to choose between that or a chance, a very small chance, to make it in the industry, right? And I don't even say this about Rhode Island. I feel like everywhere should have a healthy, if not large, but healthy film industry, right? So the Real Housewives of Rhode Island is really the perfect project for our state because it's high profile, right? Presumably it's a long commitment, you know. I don't have the numbers on like the average, amount of seasons for each of these, but some of them have been going on since they started. Like, they're still going on today. So presumably this is not like a one and done project. And again, it kind of works well for not only a reality show, but a reality show in this vein, because again, like I said, everyone knows everyone. And a quote from Andy Cohen saying, quote, "Rhode Island is such a small state and they all kind of know each other and overlap. And it's an incredible group of women who have really interesting connections. I think it's going to really surprise people," end quote. And I couldn't agree more that there's the specific kind of nature, the social fabric of Rhode Island really lends itself to a reality show like this. But if nothing else, like people have been mentioning, the show will bring more attention to Rhode Island, which could inspire more tourism. And another quote here from Steve Feinberg at the Rhode Island TV and Film Office, saying, quote, it's great promotion to a worldwide audience. It will absolutely attract more tourists to Rhode Island. There's no question." So very, very exciting stuff. Again, I'm really excited to hear the cast list because I want to learn all about them and whatnot. I also see Viviana put in the comments here, Austin, North Carolina, and Georgia also have growing film industries. Yeah, Georgia like Atlanta. Austin is definitely in Texas. Austin's a huge creative capital of the country. North Carolina, I've also heard that, but again, not as much. Apparently Rhode Island was one of the first states to offer tax incentives that have become almost ubiquitous now. From my understanding, I think Louisiana was the first, but Rhode Island was not too long after. So again, I think we have all the makings of a really great film or even just arts and culture regional capital. I think all the pieces are there. We just need like the right circumstances to really like put all of those together. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay. Let's talk about story number 5. So the Golden Globes is introducing a category for Best Podcast. Very interesting. This is going to debut for the 2026 award show in January 2026. The way it's going to work is that the top 25 podcasts will be eligible, and then Golden Globes voters will narrow that down to 6 nominees. Now, the eligibility of those, like what does the top 25 mean? Like, how is that being determined? That's going to be announced in the coming weeks. So it was left intentionally vague for now. And I have a quote here from Golden Globes president Helene Hone, apologies for mispronouncing the last name, saying, quote, "As the world of entertainment continues to evolve, we are excited to recognize new forms of storytelling. Podcasts have emerged as a profound medium for sharing narratives and building communities across global borders and generations. By celebrating achievements in both audio and visual podcasts, we aim to honor our heritage categories while making room for new voices and formats to be heard. The Golden Globes have always celebrated the best in film and television. Now we're making room for new voices and formats to be heard." End quote. I think this is a very interesting story because it really just speaks to the growing dominance. It seems like podcasts can't grow anymore. It's already grown so much, but it really just speaks to how dominant podcasting has become and how much more dominant it can and probably will become, right? So this has a format, because of course we've had radio shows forever, but podcasts really began in the early 2000s. The word itself, I believe, was coined by a writer for The Guardian. I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but the word itself is actually a portmanteau of iPod and broadcast, so put them together, podcast. Apple, I think it really takes off when Apple adds podcasting to iTunes in 2005, right? I mean, I remember listening to podcasts going back to like middle school, so we're probably talking 2010, maybe even 2009. But of course the format really blew up in the 2010s and then especially now in the 2020s, right? It feels weird to say the 20s, right? Because we have this idea of the 20s, but we're in the 20s, right? Of course, huge shows like Joe Rogan Experience and Call Her Daddy have really changed the game in terms of how successful a podcast could be, right? The ceiling has just been getting higher and higher and higher. It's become a dominant form of media consumption for most people. Again, that's where I get most of my news. I'm obviously filtering through news articles for this YouTube channel and this show. So of course I'm seeing a bunch of headlines, but it's really podcasts where I actually listen to reporting about a lot of stories, right? And many have called this past presidential election, the 2024 election, the quote-unquote podcast election, right? That really made it Trump going on Joe Rogan, Kamala Harris going on Call Her Daddy, right? It really became an important vehicle for national figures, right? And it makes sense because the format, it is beloved, celebrated because of its looser format. It's not typically constrained by time constraints the way you would have on traditional broadcast of a radio show or even like a news broadcast. Looser form, structure, and the intimacy, right? You really feel like you start to develop this parasocial relationship with the host, right? Because they're in your head, right? The headphones, they're in your brain, right? And all things considered, they're fairly cheap to produce. So it's been a very viable business proposition, depending on if you play your cards right and you have the right. You need all the right ingredients to really strike gold, but when you do, you really strike gold, right? So, I think the iHeart Radio Awards have had a podcast category, but none of the major awards have introduced a podcast category until now. And I guess if anyone was going to do it, it makes sense that it's the Golden Globes, right? Because they've kind of been in this identity crisis for the last decade, really finding their footing after all the scandals with the Hollywood Foreign Press Association. And again, it's already an awards association and program that is multimedia, right? It's awarding both film and television. So what's podcast? Let's add podcast to the mix. Notably though, Vanity Fair notes that they actually beat the Grammys to the punch. Like, you think of any of them, of all the different major awards programs, you would imagine the Grammys would be the first, since they're already dealing with music, with audio, right? But in any case, IndieWire notes that this is also part of a larger trend of new awards categories, right? So I've done videos on this channel before that the Academy in the next couple of years is going to be adding award categories for best casting and best stunt work. And even the Golden Globes themselves recently added the Cinematic and Box Office Achievement Award, which essentially is just like an award that exists to get people who wouldn't normally watch the Golden Globes to watch it because their favorite movie, which is like a Minecraft movie or something, could get a Golden Globe, right? So I guess this is a question of, is this some of these casting and stunt work have been asked for decades, so they don't feel reactive, right? But you can imagine a scenario where awards shows like this keep adding categories to create new novelty, to the point where it just becomes so bloated that they're and the award for the best hair flip in a movie is, right? It almost becomes the MTV of movie awards, right? So very interesting. I think this really speaks to, again, the dominance and prominence of podcasting. I'm really interested to see the actual way that this is going to manifest in terms of the eligibility. I guess it's probably just to make their lives easier, but the best podcast of a year, and also, is it a show or is it a specific episode? It's all very vague, presumably just a show. But you can imagine that maybe the best podcast is number 26 or lower, right? So I don't know. There's a lot of unanswered questions here, but it's definitely an interesting development to see. Okay, that wraps up the show. Just want to give one final plug to Cinnamon Q. So it's not just a YouTube channel. It started as and still is a Substack newsletter where we publish written reviews for new movies coming out. I've kind of taken a little bit of a hiatus for that. So in my stead, we have my very good friend and collaborator, Jacob Bobley, who's been writing reviews for, again, new movies coming out. So definitely go check that out. It's been a lot of fun when I was doing it. It's been fun seeing Jacob kind of explore his own writing, film review writing journey. You can find the link to that in the description below. You can also just go to your browser and type in cinemancso.substack.com. Once again, thank you all so much for watching. If you haven't yet, please like this video. It really, really helps with engagement and the algorithm and people finding the channel. So if you haven't found the channel, why not subscribe? I'm trying to grow this community the best I can so that maybe one day, I can feel satisfied moving back to Rhode Island and leaving New York City, but it doesn't matter because I have found a fulfilling life path on YouTube with all of you. So until next time, peace out.